watch on the recordings, okay? Face coverings work, bandanas work or whatever, but you do need to have a face covering or you gotta go, sorry. There are some other places where they have them, you can pick them up. I'm just all out, like, I was down to my last packet and the last 10 of those are gone, so. I will bring more on, okay. Okay, so another quick announcement that I want to talk about. I got some feedback from your fellows, and it seems like federalism didn't stick exactly in terms of structure of government. So I want to do a quick, just reminder, okay? There are local elections and you have local representatives, city council, county commissioners, mayors, okay? And then you have state representatives and elections, and each state has its own weirdness to it, okay? In the state of Oklahoma, for example, you're going to elect state senators, and you're also going to elect state representatives or from your district and by county, okay? In Nebraska, they have a unicam, so they only have one legislature. In every Western state, they have plural executives. That means we don't just elect the governor, we elect lieutenant governors, secretaries of education, we elect railroad commissions in Texas, right? So, board of education, lots of things like that, okay? And these are all executive, whereas at the federal level, we elect one executive. Who do we elect? Who's an executive? The president, right? I know you guys all knew that, so I'm going to say it here. We elect one executive at the federal level. It's the president. There it is. See, easy. All right. So, but we also elect district level, based on population, members of Congress in the House of Representatives, and they serve based on population within states, okay? In the House of Representatives, senators are elected from each state to go to Washington, D.C., two from each state. We will talk about all this later, but I want to be clear that we have government where people serve the state and the people of the state at the federal level. We have government where people serve the people of the state at the state level and then in your town, all right? There are maybe weird things that states do. So, for example, all Western states have initiatives and referendums. Not all Eastern states do. By Western, I mean anything west of the Mississippi. Okay. Initiatives and referendums. Some of them also have things called recalls. Recently, there was in Oklahoma. We do not have recall at the state level, we do at the local level. So there's a recall election against city council members and the mayor. All of them failed except for one. Yes, that's correct. All of them failed except for one. There was also this week a very, heavily covered in the news recall election in California. Anyone?
Nobody got
Okay. The governor of California was the subject of a recall election. He prevailed quite handily. The last time there was a recall election of the governor in California, that was Gray Davis, and he did not. As a result, basically, if you say, do you vote to recall? Yes or no. And then if you don't recall who you want, or if the person is recalled who you want, there's listed like seriously like 20 people. And so someone won that. Do you guys know who it was? If I say total recall, does that help? No, it's still Arnold Schwarzenegger. All right, you're gonna say it, right? Sorry, he said it. All right, it's Arnold Schwarzenegger. Okay, so there are recall elections, initiatives. We're gonna talk a little bit about some initiatives while we talk about civil liberties. But I did want to make it clear that there are these three different levels in which there is representation, and I think that you guys may have had some problem with that in work those. So be sure to check the chapter on that. You guys did answer this, and I did put it in here in your slides, and I apologize. So I'm going to tell you what the results were. In terms of establishment of religion, 7% found that to be their favorite part, 23% free exercise and liberty, 59% freedom of speech or press, and freedom to assembly and petition got 11%. That's pretty, what it normally breaks down. Speech and press tend to win. Since I have my phone in my hand, I'm gonna go ahead and take attendance right now. Is it ready? All right, attendance is active. You have 2 minutes. Just a reminder, if you don't have a mask today, I am all out. I'm afraid you're gonna have to leave and view the video later. It's just, I'm out. So if you came in later and you have one. All right. Today we're gonna talk about the rights of the accused. On Monday, we only talked about the civil liberties contained in the First Amendment. We talked a little bit about the Second Amendment when we talked about federalism, as you guys will recall, the 14th Amendment, we talked briefly about it. The Third Amendment, we're going to skip because there haven't been any cases to really define it. It's kind of an amendment of its time. Soldiers cannot be housed in your house. Though I would argue that maybe there's a case brewing whenever it comes to police taking over your house for surveillance and things like that. I think that's a possibility. We'll see. But today we're going to talk about the Fourth Amendment, Fifth Amendment, Sixth Amendment, and Eighth Amendment. Again, all the rest of them that have specific provisions, except for the 7th, which is about grand jury, which again, I'm just going to let it go for right now. And these collectively have to do with the rights of the accused, those who are detained by the state or incarcerated. And the Fourth Amendment, which is my favorite amendment, because the way that my mind works, because I have rather a legalistic mind and I really like the specificities in it. It says the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated. I like it. It doesn't say the right of citizens, it says the right of people. It says, secure in their persons, my body is mine. You don't have the right to seize or search it. My house is my castle. You do not have the right to enter, seize, search. Papers, right? My letters between me and my fellow anarchists. Right? My effects, my phone, right? Your phone can't be searched, but without a warrant, and no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause. And probable cause is supported by an oath or an affirmation, particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. Okay? Now, I like the Fourth Amendment. I think it's pretty clear. However, the courts have had some difficulty with its clarity. We'll talk about this. Fourth Amendment protects against unfair searches and seizures. It does. There are some issues. If I am arrested, or if I am stopped during the commission of a crime, whether that crime is speeding or assault and battery, or a domestic violence incident, all right? The police may search me, anything that's in their plain view, and anything that's in their control. I want you to think about this in terms of a car, right? Whenever I was in law school, I had a friend who had a problem with her Sept, really, right? She was always in a crisis. And I always had a problem in that my car was very unreliable. So I had to share for a period of time, this was during that period of time, my brother's Chevy S10 pickup truck, manual transmission. Right? And how many of you guys know what that is? 1, 2, 3. How many of you know what a manual transmission is? So Chevy S10 is a teeny tiny truck, right? If 3 people are in it, then they're pretty small, right? Especially if it's a manual transmission. And so one night my friend Dawn says to me, hey, Melody, can you take me over to my boyfriend? He's at his house and I don't know what he's doing and I'm really concerned. This is her voice. And I said, okay. And so I took her over to the house. She got out of the car in reverse, and I drove off. Now, I'm particularly describing this car for a reason, right? Chevy S10 has no backseat, right? It had this particular manual transmission had a little quirk in that if you slow down, you had to get it into first, and in order to get it out of first, you absolutely had to come to a complete full stop. Okay? So if you came to a stoplight, or if you came to a stoplight and you were slowing down as you shift out into first gear, and it turns green on you, everybody behind you hates you because you're gonna have to stop it. Or the car just dies, right? So this particular night, I dropped her off, and a police car followed me from the house where I dropped her off until I got to a stop sign on, where was I? 40? Anyway, it was a stop sign. And I get to the stop sign, and I'm in a Chevy S10, which I have to get down at first. In order for me to go again, I have to come to a complete stop. I do. I start to go forward, and he turns on his lights. He pulls me over for rolling through a stop sign. No. And he said, you did it, that's how you did it. I said, well, you can say whatever you like, but I'll probably get a mechanical analysis of this car and tell you that it's impossible for me to roll through a stop sign. Right? Can't do it. But whatever. I said, so that's what you're going to be making it for. He goes, well, I just want to see what were you doing at that house? Flashlight, start shining, flashlight. Trying to get behind the little seat that has this much space. I was driving off a friend who's going to see her boyfriend. He was at a friend's house. Do you know who was there? No. What were you doing there? So, friend, just go see your boyfriend. He's at a friend's house. Did you drugs in the car? Did you smoke some drugs while you were there? I said, well, you followed me since I left the house. I'm pretty sure you know I didn't go inside. He said, did they give you something to carry? I said, no. He said, I'm just going to need to search your car. And I said, no. And he said, I have the right to search your car. I said, no, you don't. You don't. Within my control, plain view, you're using your flashlight. So are you in law school? I said, yes. So I'm going to go sign. This is really important. There is no warrant needed if there is reasonable suspicion or consent. He says, I'm going to need to search your car. And I say, okay, or are you sure? And I get out. Then that's consent. Okay. And frankly, my friend was a little flaky. And God knows what she might have dropped in my car. But she didn't. Because I searched it out. But that consent matters. Many years later, when I was older, in teaching, my house was broken into, and everything of value that I had was stolen. They left that $70 garage sale so good for some reason. Everything of value that I had was stolen. And about a month later, the police came to my door, 2 policemen. And they knocked on the door and they said, Patricia Hill. And I said, oh no, you have the wrong house. I started to shut the door and they're like, nope, our information says Patricia Hill lives here. And I said, it must be really old information. I've been here for 3 years and the guy who lived here before me was not Patricia Hill. They said, well, we have information that she lives here. I said, she doesn't live here. Well, is she here? She's staying here? No. Well, we're just going to need you to come in and see. And I said, No, you aren't. They said, well, our information says, and I said, did you have that information on a warrant? They said, no, but we can take you down Patricia Hill to the station to verify. Why? And I said, okay. Because I'm not. If you look at the records of who owns this house, you'll see that Patricia Hill has ever owned this house as far as I know. They said, well, just let us search the house. I said, no. I said, I'll get my driver's license and I'll show you who I am. Maybe because I've watched HGTV and I wanted to see my Saturday. It's important to me. And they said, okay, we'll just step inside while you do that. And I said, no, you'll wait on the porch. Listen to me. You have the right to be secure in your persons, in your houses, in your papers, in your effects. Because let me explain, if you let the government authority into your home, then they can search it and they don't have to pay for anything they destroy or damage, and they don't have to clean it up. You understand? When someone says, can I search your car? You say, let's try that again. If someone says, can I search your car? You say, someone says, can I come inside? You say, no. You say, did you have a warrant? If they say, I do have a warrant, and it has your name on it. You say, okay, I want my lawyer, and then you shut up. You can say 4 words. You ready? I want my, or a, lawyer. That's what you can say over and over and over again. And if they say, well, we know that you're responsible, and you say, I didn't do it, you didn't do what? Shut up. I want my lawyer. Okay? I don't care how innocent you are, because understand, these rights are not protecting criminals, they're protecting the innocent. I want my lawyer. And you say no. There's this other thing called reasonable suspicion. I was in college for a long time, like 14 years. And I studied things and I went places and I traveled on a shoestring and I generally traveled alone. And if you are a white woman traveling by yourself back and forth to South America, you are a drug dealer, drug courier. Right? So anytime I walked into an airport on my way to South America or on my way back to South America, I just wore the loosest possible clothes I had, because reasonable suspicion at a border is different. Okay? So I get searched every time. I get searched every time I go through, I still get searched every time I go through an airport. I don't know what it is about me. I mean, there's something in my body that just turns off those full body sensors. It is unpleasant. But you lose some rights at borders. Okay? Cars are an issue. There's a song, you guys may have heard it, I think it's called 99 Problems. Yes. It's not completely accurate, right? There's some problems there. I mean, you know, could your car then be impounded? Yes, but then there's all the paperwork, blah, 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 right? Okay. So it could take your car and full of drugs, just so you know, but generally got the idea. You say no, the trunk is not in your control. Say no. Okay. Drug tests are another issue. Can you be tested for drugs? Is that invasive? Is that searching your person? Do you have to have a warrant for that, to search my person? To put me through an MRI to see if I have baggies of drugs? However, if you hold me long enough, it's gonna have to use the bathroom. Wiretapping, the Patriot Act. Big issues there. Right? One of the big issues I would argue with wiretapping, and look, trust me, but like I said, the entire law school courses on civil liberties, searches and seizures, the Fourth Amendment, etc. Okay? And if you want to take kind of a more in-depth into this, we also have 2 civil liberties course, upper level, at OU, at the undergraduate level. Please, I used to teach it, I teach it occasionally in rotation. But the big issue here is this. There are courts that exist where government authorities can go and ask for a wiretap. And it can be given to them. It's not open. They go to the judge. They say, this is the information we have. They're given the wiretap. We're trusting that the judge is making them provide probable cause. And we do not get information about how many of those have been issued unless we know it has been issued. If we know that there's a wiretap on our phone, we can ask for a Freedom of Information Act release of that wiretap information. So the ACLU fought against this and they said, we're pretty sure that you'll try to wiretap us, and we have a problem with that. They said, do you know that? Because if you don't, you can't have information. So access is a little tough to find out that information. The Fifth Amendment, you guys notice it, and prevents self-incrimination. Remember how I told you you had some things you had to say, right? And what were they? I want my life. Okay. Can I search your car? Can I come into your house? No, no, no. It prevents self-incrimination and double jeopardy. Double jeopardy means you can't be tried for the same crime twice. Okay. Miranda versus Arizona is the landmark case. Miranda's not a nice guy. I want to be really clear. Okay. He's not a nice guy. And he gets to this later. But the Miranda rights basically say that if you are arrested or if you are being questioned under suspicion, you have to be given your rights. Okay, told your rights. And they are, you have the right to remain silent. Come on, let's go. Anything you say,
Animal beings against you.
the animal comes against you. You have the right to an attorney. You cannot afford an attorney. One will be appointed for you by the court. Okay. There's an obligation to inform people of these rights. And that is because, and this is super important, the Supreme Court is going to say, hey, look, people are not trained to be lawyers. Okay? So there is some duty to give them some notice. Now, there's not necessarily duty that they understand it. If there is. But Brendan Dassey would harm you. The exclusionary rule is going to derive from the Fourth and Fifth Amendments. The Fourth Amendment, right, is going to say that you have the right to be secure in your persons, right? And so therefore, if a search and a seizure occurs and there is not a probable cause warrant, or if that search has gone forward on other pretext, Matt versus Ohio, for example, they really wanted to get this woman for a long time. She was a known pornographer, possibly a madam, unclear. Okay? They've been trying to get her for a long time. Okay? And so, under a search for a fugitive, they went into her house looking for this fugitive, and in a box about as big as my purse, they found pornography. They said, ha ha! We shall arrest you, you pornographer. And the court said, was it a fugitive mouse? Why were you searching this? Can't do that. Your warrant gave you permission to search for a fugitive in this location, not to go through boxes under beds. Okay? There are a growing number of good faith exceptions. As a person who particularly likes the simplicity, I believe, of the Fourth Amendment, this bothers me. In Herring versus U.S. in 2008, Supreme Court said an honest mistake. If we said an honest mistake when executing this, then they can still use that evidence. And in Herring versus U.S., they had an outdated warrant. They had the wrong address. They had somebody else's name. And they had, oh yeah, they used a no-knock warrant and they killed somebody who was standing there freaked out with a gun because somebody was pounding down their door at 3 o'clock in the morning. And the Supreme Court said, well, it's an accident. It's a little worrisome. Sixth Amendment protects your right to counsel and jury in criminal cases. Now, this is important. A jury trial in criminal cases, we'll get to the judiciary, I will talk a lot about this. Actually, Vicky will talk a lot about this. But we'll talk a lot about this, okay? But Gideon versus Wainwright is going to set the precedent for counsel. And the Supreme Court has ruled unanimously. Gideon versus Wainwright is the first case. It's the first case, okay? But over time, the Supreme Court has only strengthened this holding, and they have ruled unanimously that a lawyer is a necessity in criminal court, not a luxury. Many years ago, before all but 2 of you were born, there was a show called The Practice on television. Okay? And still in syndication, I'm sure, somewhere. You can find it on the internet, nothing ever dies, right? So The Practice, in particular, there's an episode that has always stood with me. It's a speech by Eugene, and he's talking about defending the room. That his job as a defense attorney is to defend the process of justice. It's not to get bad guys off. It's to make sure that the state does their job and upholds and protects the civil liberties, not just of criminals, but of criminals, so that they do not violate the civil liberties of people who are not, of innocent people, like you guys, pure as a driven snow, right? So again, you say, no, you can't come into my car. No, you can't come into my house. I want my lawyer, because that's your right, not because you did anything wrong, but because the state has no right to be there. Trial should be speedy and the peers. I had someone ask me after class the other day how COVID was affecting this. Yeah, had an effect, but trust me, it's just one little thing in that. We talk about, again, when we get to the judiciary, some of the issues there. And jury selection has long been an issue. Ethnic minorities and women have been historically excluded from juries, right? And so that's an issue. The Eighth Amendment is going to protect against cruel and unusual punishment. Now, it can be cruel as long as we do it all the time. It has to be cruel and unusual, okay? And it can be unusual as long as it's not cruel, right? It has to be cruel and unusual. The death penalty was unconstitutional for a bit in the 1970s. This was Furman versus Georgia. I'm certain that it is in your readings. Furman versus Georgia. In the state of Georgia, if you were Black and you were convicted of murder, you got the death penalty, and if you were white, you got life in prison. Almost exclusively. And the Supreme Court said, seems a bit arbitrary. You have to come up with a different way to do this. So we have a bifurcated process now. But death penalty retained back. It's currently only legal in 32 states. However, right? The other 18 is illegal. And it's not used in a lot of states. It's used really in a handful, under 10. Definitely. Oklahoma being one of them. Bays versus Reeves in 2008 has to do with an Oklahoma issue. It upholds the constitutionality of lethal injection even when there are missing chemicals, like the ones that make you numb so you don't feel it. Because they don't make that one anymore. Torture, force feeding, waterboarding. I had someone speak to me after class about this as well. They said, well, if you're in Navy SEALs training, it can do that to you. Yes, but you have consented to it by being in that training, okay? As opposed to being waterboarded, force fed. I would make you guys watch Iron Angels if we have time, but we don't. So, some other time. Let's talk about incarceration. That's the United States at the top. USA. We put more people in prison than anybody else by a lot. It's not even close. 716 out of every 100,000 people are in prison or in jail in the United States. Versus 492 in Rwanda, 475 in Russia, 274 in Brazil, 147 in Spain, 130 in Australia, 121 in China, which in number of people in prison actually comes second to the United States. But again, a lot more people. Canada, 118 for, sorry, yeah, and then 98 for Austria and France, Germany, Denmark, Sweden, 67 to 79, and India. 716, the closest, Rwanda, just behind that Russia, land of the free. Number of people in prisons and jails in 1980 for drug use was about 40,000 people. Then we started the war on drugs. We did a lot of things. By 2011, it was 500,000 people. More than 10 times as many people incarcerated for drug use, for having drugs on their possession. Be the drug courier that we do. A lot of this has to do with public perception of crime. In 1993, we actually had a pretty high crime rate in terms of violent crime, okay? In terms of violent crime per 1,000 people. About 80 per 1,000 people. That's pretty high. And there's a reason. We had a recession. That causes crime rates to go up. There's some other reasons for that. Freakonomics would. So we're down to 20. But if you look at public perception says, hey, look, the majority of us still think that there's more crime this year than there was last year. Who's responsible for that? Media. Because if you watch your local news, for example, you're going to see murder and crime, and abduction, and then later on you go, wait a second, none of that even happens here. It's sensationalized, right? We draw attention to it. So how did mass incarceration happen? Think about what I just talked about. Drugs, right? But also our perception of violent crime, so our fear, right? We got a lot of fear. We're going to declare the war on drugs just as inner city economies collapse. Since the 1980s, this is long before that. It's not having anything to do with that. We have companies that are going to move their industrial workings to bright, shiny, suburban areas. For example, Fire, Cultural Center Universe, largest rural industrial park in the nation. People are going to move out of inner cities and move to different places. They're also going to move out of the country. Inner city economies are going to collapse. And so people who need to make a living or who are depressed are going to turn to drugs. Same time, Democrats and Republicans are going to compete against each other. So both parties, right? Both parties are responsible. They're going to compete against each other to see who can be tougher on crime. I'm going to keep you safe. I'm going to make sure those criminals get behind bars. Our streets, it's like a war zone out there. So we're going to do something about it. They use this rhetoric, the same thing that's being used in the media. So we said it was the media's fault. Well, partially also politicians' fault. Mandatory sentences are passed in states, in state legislatures, and also at the federal level. No parole, no judicial flexibility. I'm 19 years old. First offense. I have some crack cocaine. And I go to prison for the next 15 years. What am I going to do when I get out of prison? Well, private prisons are also big businesses. Private prisons really like drug offenders because they're not violent offenders. And so they're easy to control and contain. And, oh yeah, make money off of it. Not just from the state, they also have prison industry. In Oklahoma, we have 5. Back whenever I was a private attorney, I represented one. They also do a lot of campaign donations. Jill Alexander talks about this in her book, The New Jim Crow. There's a lot of information there, I know. But here's the key. Across ethnicities, crime rates, criminal activity, and drug use is the same. Statistically, just the same proportion of white people use drugs as the same proportion of Asian people, and Latino people, and Black people, and Native American people. It's all the same. Number one. But these sentencing disparities are systemic and discretionary, and they have to do with, for example, how much time you get for crack cocaine as compared to powder cocaine. Crack cocaine used by poor inner city people of color. Powder cocaine used by guys on Wall Street. The poor are also manipulated. Again, Vinny's going to talk about this. No jury trial, plea bargain. Public defenders are overworked, that's true, but they also work together with prosecutors to clear their thoughts. And so, for example, I had a client come to me many years ago who wanted an expungement on his record, and he had pled guilty. And I said, "Why did you plead guilty to this?" And he said, "Well, the public defender walked me by the jury trial, by the jury pool. Made it really clear that I would definitely go to prison." Disenfranchised. ex-felons are gonna lose the right to vote, sometimes for life. Okay, you're certainly gonna lose it while you're in prison, no matter what, right? But in Oklahoma, for example, you lose it while you're in prison. If you get out early, you still can't vote or register to vote. But once your time is done, you can register to vote. So in Florida, it was for life. 600,000 people could not vote. But Floridians in 2018, using the power of the initiative, direct democracy that we was talking about, the states are different, said, hey, this isn't right. If you've done your time, you should be able to vote. The legislature immediately put restrictions and overturned it. Not entirely, but they said, yeah, but if you owe any fines, and we're not going to tell you where they are, you have to find those out for yourself. In any court across the state, and you register to vote, that's a felony. So you're a felon. You probably violate parole. Oklahomans directly voted to reduce many felonies to misdemeanors, 2 full years for the legislature to enact the legislation and release people under that. They did eventually do it, but it took 2 full years. That said, I just recently did an expungement for an old high school friend of mine on 7 different counts. What was he doing? So those are no longer felonies, they're misdemeanors. Results in legalized discrimination. Because look, if you're asked whenever you apply for a job, if you're a felon, and you say no, and they run a check, which is really easy, and you lie, you're not going to get the job. And if you say yes, you're not going to get the job. The Black Lives Matter movement is going to arise out of this context. Okay? John Carl, who's an OU sociology professor, says, yeah, race is a big part of it, but it's not the whole story. It's broader than that, okay? But here's the problem. We criminalize things and people who frighten us. I was driving home the other day, actually yesterday, and I saw a woman walking down the street, and she was very thin, and she was shouting, very thin, walking very fast. Literally, she was tweaking pretty hard, right? And as I walked by her, I went, poor girl, or I didn't walk by, as a joke by, it was like, poor girl. But if I had my children with me, I would have done what? If I was walking with my children, I would have done what? I would have crossed the street. Because it was frightening. Is she gonna hurt me or my children? No. The homeless man sleeping in the library yesterday gonna hurt me or my children? No. We criminalize mental illness. We criminalize addiction because it frightens us. Carl points out that proactive policing need not result in more incarceration. Instead, again, this is kind of behind the defund the police movement. Instead, police or some other entity would focus on things like treatment, literacy, education, in order to get help for people instead of putting them in prison. So, favorite amendment in the Bill of Rights? I'll ask you guys really quickly. Then I'm going to talk about privacy for like 8 minutes. I can't list them all, obviously, because, you know, there's a lot. I only have 4 choices. It is active now. Yes, exactly. All right, so I was going to talk about privacy, but I didn't make it there in the other class, so we'll stay consistent. We won't move on quite to privacy yet. We will start with that on Monday. Until then, go to your labs on Friday, turn in your paper on Friday. Turn in your paper on Friday. Read the instructions, look at the rubric, which is different. It's attached, okay? Do things you need to do, go out, eat